By late August 1943, the German command faced mounting pressure to turn the tide in the Bay of Biscay. From bases in occupied France, a group of Dornier bombers readied themselves under a grey sky, their bomb bays concealing a new kind of weapon, the Henschel HS-293 radio-guided glide bomb, sleek and aircraft-shaped with an extended wingspan. The HS-293 weighed roughly 1,100 pounds and carried a focused, high-explosive charge designed to punch a ship's hull with terrifying efficiency. It represented a shift in thinking, instead of relying solely on massed formations and unguided bombs. The Luftwaffe was betting on precision delivered from standoff ranges, an idea that would force naval crews to confront a different kind of threat. As the squadron climbed, the first support group maintained its patrol. HMS Egret steamed as part of the escort screen, sailors moving through routine checks, unaware that the incoming aircraft carried weapons that could be steered toward them with human input after release. The approach began as a distant hum that swelled into a roar. Shortly after release, a silvery glider dropped away and an operator in the launching aircraft took up his controller, guiding the bomb with corrective inputs while keeping eyes on a trailing flare or visual marker. The effect was surgical. The bomb could be nudged left or right, held at a glide angle, and driven precisely toward a vulnerable section of a ship's hull. For the men aboard the convoy escorts, the new reality was grim. Anti-aircraft guns, evasive turns, and even aggressive counterattacks suddenly had to contend with a weapon that did not simply fall and hope for luck, but could be shepherded onto its target. The psychological shock of facing guided weapons was as important as the physical damage they inflicted. Crews had to learn to identify release patterns and to employ new tactics under pressure. The HS-293's arrival on the battlefield was the product of urgent wartime innovation. Engineers and designers, pressed by frustrated commanders and shrinking options at sea, drew together airframe, propulsion, and radio control expertise to turn an idea into a deployable munition. The glide bomb used a simple propulsion-free airframe with folding or fixed wings to generate lift and extend its reach. Its guidance relied on a visual or radio beacon and an operator, who watched the munitions flight and corrected its path in real time. That human-in-the-loop element made the weapon effective even when automated electronics were limited, but it also created vulnerabilities. If the operator lost sight of the weapon, if radio transmission was interrupted, or if jamming was applied, the bomb could miss or become useless. The Allies were quick to study these characteristics and to adapt. Electronic countermeasures, everything from deliberate radio jamming to deceptive signals, were developed and refined. And tactics evolved to reduce exposure. Smoke screens, tighter convoy formations, different patrol patterns, and the deployment of fighter cover became part of the layered response. The contest became one of measure and countermeasure, of hardware and human skill, with each side trying to force the other into a momentary blind spot or a flawed assumption. When we look back at such technological turning points in history, we notice a recurring theme. The tools are only as powerful as the clarity that guides them. World War II engineers needed clean, interpretable signals to steer their weapons through an environment full of interference and danger. And naval sailors needed focus and calm to respond to threats they had never faced before. Today, our environment of information noise presents a different but comparable challenge. Researchers, writers, and historians wading through archives, oral histories, and dense technical manuals require the ability to tune out distractions and preserve a high-fidelity thread of attention. That is why, at Dark Seas, we rely on Riken's everyday earbuds. Their active noise cancellation helps create a private listening space in crowded reading rooms or at bustling conferences. Long battery life, advertised up to 32 hours means. They won't cut out halfway through a long transcription session or a multi-day research trip. And multi-point connectivity keeps us linked across laptop, phone, and tablet while cross-checking sources. Reliable audio helps us pick up small details in old recordings and hear subtle differences in testimony. The same way a steady radio link once let an operator steer a glide bomb to a precise impact point. Raycon's earbuds offer a practical, cost-effective tool for modern historians who need sustained concentration without carrying heavy, costly equipment. Back on the broader strategic level, the Luftwaffe's turn toward precision ordnance reflected the shifting dynamics of naval warfare in the Atlantic. From 1939 onward, the oceans were critical arteries for the Allied war effort. Convoys moved food, fuel, equipment and troops, and keeping those lifelines open was a top priority. German strategy had long emphasized submarine warfare as the most effective way to interdict shipping, and U-boats did enormous damage during the early and middle years of the conflict. Yet air power grew in importance as the war progressed, offering reach, speed, and the ability to perform reconnaissance as well as strike missions. Aircraft patrolled for convoys, relayed positions, and when equipped with specialized weapons, they became convoy killers in their own right. The development of radio-guided weapons like the HS-293 was an attempt to overcome the limitations of conventional bomb loads and dive bombing in the face of increasingly capable escort screens and improved Allied anti-aircraft defenses. The result was a brief but intense phase of experimentation and adaptation. New tactics, fresh electronic warfare measures, and the steady interplay of invention and counter-invention that characterized so much of the technological history of the war. In the larger sweep, these innovations pushed both sides to reimagine how to protect convoys and how to attack them. And they foreshadowed the precision weapons and electronic warfare that would dominate later conflicts. The Henschel development team, led by Professor Herbert Wagner, pursued a single, urgent problem: how to strike moving well-defended targets at sea from beyond the range of shipboard anti-aircraft fire. They took inspiration from Gustav Schwarz's 1937 glide concept and, through rapid wartime iteration, combined it with a small liquid-fueled rocket to create a standoff weapon that could be launched from fast-moving bombers and then guided to its target. The result was the HS-293, a weapon that looked more like a compact glider than a conventional bomb. A modified SC-500 warhead at its center, fitted with a Kopfring to encourage a perpendicular impact, light gauge casing to maximize explosive payload, and folding or fixed wings to provide lift and range. Engineers prioritized payload over armor penetration, accepting that the weapon would be most effective against lightly armored escorts and merchantmen rather than heavily plated warships. The design choices reflected a clear operational doctrine: achieve lethal effect through precision rather than brute force, strike from a distance where traditional defenses were less effective, and force convoys and escorts to expend attention and resources on a new class of threat. Development was intensely practical. Designers balanced aerodynamic tests, radio-controlled trials, and live-fire exercises to fine-tune the interplay between glide characteristics, rocket thrust, and human control inputs. The inclusion of 5 brightly colored flares at the rear of the bomb, or flashing lights for night work, was a low-tech but essential usability feature. It allowed an operator in the launching aircraft to keep visual contact and make course corrections in real time, using a FUG 203 transmitter, turning an otherwise dumb munition into an interactive weapon system. Operational employment of the HS-293 required a careful choreography between aircrew, equipment, and weather. Aircraft such as the Do-217, He-111, and FW carried the weapons under wings or in bomb bays and approached targets at speeds and altitudes chosen to maximize the missile's flight envelope and the operator's ability to track the flares. A 10-second rocket burn after release imparted an initial burst of speed and the ability to reach beyond what an unpowered glide would permit. Once the rocket cut out, the bomb behaved like a piloted glider, responsive to micro-corrections from the crew. That human-in-the-loop model made the HS-293 flexible and adaptive to minor course changes, but also introduced fragility, loss of visual contact, radio interference, or deliberate jamming could blunt its effectiveness. Allied analysts quickly identified both sides of that equation. On one hand, the guided bomb created a tactical shock. Escort crews accustomed to predicting fall zones from ballistic trajectories found themselves facing a weapon that could be shepherded directly onto a weak spot. On the other hand, The dependency on visual tracking and radio links opened avenues for countermeasured smokescreens, evasive maneuvers timed to break visual locks, tighter defensive formations to complicate target acquisition, and increasingly sophisticated electronic warfare tactics aimed at jamming or spoofing the control signals. The Bay of Biscay in mid-1943 offered a brutal demonstration of how those capabilities and countermeasures played out under real combat pressure. The area was a vital passage for U-boats transiting to and from bases along the French Atlantic coast, and both sides poured assets into the region. German doctrine, at least temporarily, shifted toward keeping U-boats surfaced to provide anti-aircraft fire rather than diving immediately, a decision ordered by Admiral Karl Dönitz that reflected a desperate attempt to blunt Allied air superiority, but that also increased exposure to air attack. The Allies responded in kind, sending dedicated escort groups and support squadrons to patrol likely transit lanes and to hunt for surfaced submarines. Encounters escalated into fast, violent engagements where a handful of guided bombs could have outsized strategic effect by removing escort vessels and forcing convoys to reroute or slow, thereby amplifying the U-boat threat at sea. Tactical accounts from the August 1943 OHL operations underline how quickly the calculus of a convoy escort could change. When Dornier Do 17s appeared over the horizon carrying HS-293s, their arrival was preceded by a low, ominous drone that turned into a thunderous roar as they closed. Crews who had trained for more familiar patterns of aerial attack found their routines appended. Anti-aircraft barrages became necessary but not sufficient. Evasive turns could buy little time against a guided weapon with an operator correcting to compensate, and smoke or other obscurants had to be deployed instantly and precisely to break visual locks. The attacks on the 40th Escort Group and the 1st Support Group events that culminated in the loss of Egret show how the introduction of a novel technology can produce disproportionate human tragedy. HMCs Etherbusken and other escorts sustained heavy damage in these raids. Egret's destruction was swift and catastrophic as the guided missile punched through hull plating and detonated within, ripping the ship apart and allowing little hope for organized evacuation. The human toll, nearly 200 sailors and several RAF electronic specialists on a single day in late August, was a sobering reminder that technological leaps in lethality translate immediately into lives lost and families shattered. The psychological effect on sailors and aircrew was as significant as the physical damage. Facing a weapon that could be controlled after release altered morale and decision-making at sea. Captains needed to weigh risky but potentially life-saving evasive actions against maneuvers that could expose other ships. Gunners were forced to develop new firing patterns to try to intersect the bomb's glide path. Air controllers and fleet commanders had to rethink patrol altitudes and fighter cover. For the men on deck, the sight of a glinting object bearing colored flares on a collision course was a new kind of terror. A reminder that the air dimension of naval warfare had acquired a level of precision previously associated only with land artillery or, in the future, guided rockets. For attacking aircrews, the weapon conferred a feeling of control and efficacy, and radio operators could see the immediate results of their inputs. Yet, those same crews operated under constant threat from escort fighters and anti-aircraft barrages that, if coordinated effectively, could still disrupt launches or destroy the mothership. Allied responses evolved quickly and multilaterally. Naval tactics incorporated tighter escort screens, immediate smoke deployment drills, and revised convoy routing to reduce exposure on the electronic front. Technicians and scientists accelerated the development of countermeasures. Radio jamming became a priority, as did training RAF radar and signals intelligence units to detect and interdict the guided weapons control link. These lessons fed back into both operational doctrine and technical innovation, spurring advances in both offensive guidance systems and defensive electronic warfare. The episode also influenced post-war thinking about guided munitions. Engineers studying the HS-293's strengths and weaknesses carried forward ideas about human-in-loop control. The importance of secure command links, and the need to harden weapons against jamming concepts that would become foundational as missile technology matured into the Cold War era. In the months and years after the Biscay engagements, the immediate tactical threat posed by early guided bombs diminished as countermeasures improved. But the strategic impact endured. Navies and air forces on all sides recognized that the age of precision had arrived. The contest moved from raw numbers of aircraft and ships to the quality of sensors, the resilience of communications, and the speed at which doctrine could adapt. Memorials and post-war histories recorded the losses. Ships like Egret became part of collective memory for the sailors and for the communities that mourned their dead. And surviving veterans recounted, in later interviews and memoirs, the shock of seeing a weapon that seemed to think and correct its path in flight. Technically, the HS-293 occupies a clear milestone in the lineage of guided weapons, imperfect, dependent on fragile links and direct human observation, but path-breaking in showing what precision at sea could look like, and in forcing both attackers and defenders to confront the promise and peril of remote control in warfare. The story of the HS-293 and the battles in the Bay of Biscay is therefore not only one of hardware and explosions, it is a study of adaptation under pressure, of the interplay between innovation and counter-innovation, and of how new tools change the calculus of risk, courage, and command. The engineers who sketched stability diagrams and soldered radio receivers could not have fully foreseen the human outcomes of their labors, and the sailors who stood watches on hot August decks could not have known that a relatively small device, an aerodynamic shell with a radio receiver, and a cluster of flares would so abruptly rewrite the rules of engagement. That collision of cold engineering and raw human experience is what makes episodes like the August 1943 raids both technically fascinating and deeply tragic, and why historians continue to return to them when tracing the evolution of precision weapons and the ethics and costs of their use. The surviving ships, sailors and officers alike, had no choice but to watch in stunned silence as the attack unfolded. One ship, HMS Grenville, under the steady command of Roger Hill, was lucky enough to outmaneuver the remaining incoming missiles with sharp calculated turns, narrowly escaping the fate of her sister ship. The loss of Egret marked the first time a guided missile sank a ship as a direct result of enemy action. And in the immediate aftermath, all anti-submarine patrols in the Bay of Biscay were suspended while the Allies reassessed their strategies against this powerful new weapon. The HS-293 was later used in battles from Anzio to the Mediterranean, making even the most experienced Allied commanders uneasy. Early Allied attempts to jam the radio link between the operator's transmitter and the missile's receiver were frustratingly ineffective, because many shipboard jammers operated on the wrong frequencies. While these attempts continued, the HS-293 kept wreaking havoc across the Mediterranean and beyond. On November 26, 1943, the troop transport HMT Rona was steaming as part of an Allied convoy, her decks crowded with more than 2,000 personnel, when Dornier's Do-17s appeared and released guided missiles. Despite anti-aircraft fire, one HS-293 broke through and struck Rona on the starboard side with devastating effect, tearing through the hull, igniting catastrophic fires and allowing water to surge in. The Rona listed and sank within minutes, with over 1,000 lives lost in one of the largest single-ship tragedies for Allied forces during the war. The scale of such losses made finding reliable countermeasures imperative. When British engineers introduced the Type 650 jammer, it took a different approach by targeting a critical component of the HS-293's receiver operating around 3 MHz. Unlike earlier systems, the Type 650 could disrupt the missile's communications regardless of which frequency the Germans selected, and did not require tedious manual tuning, allowing crews to act quickly under fire. Allied countermeasures became more sophisticated